Hello, everybody, and welcome to Box Seat Banter. I'm your host, Billy Ballas, a longtime baseball coach, at least long time for me. I've been doing it for over a decade, a season ticket holder, huge baseball fan, love geeking out about baseball. And today I am talking about the Cleveland Indians. So joining me back on the program is Anthony Masterson. He is a stats research professional for Fox Sports. He's a often podcast guest on a few podcasts. Yeah. And we are glad to have you back talking about the Indians. Anthony, welcome back to the program.
Yeah, man. Thanks a lot. I was here talking about the Rockies earlier, and so it's not weird that I'm here talking about two teams. I do have fairly split allegiances. Just to put that still out there, my mom is from Cleveland, grew up, born and raised, so I grew up an Indians fan. Because when I was growing up in Wyoming, we didn't even get the Rockies until I was 7. I was 93, so I'm dating myself here. But so everything that I experienced, my first professional baseball game, minor league game, all came within the Indians organization. My first ever pro game was at Cleveland Municipal Stadium, the Mistake by the Lake, as it was called. And at that time as well, the Colorado Springs Sky Sox, who I think are now defunct after this whole MILB restructuring, they were the AAA team for the Indians at that point, before they became the AAA team for the Rockies when the Rockies came in '93. So my family has a house in the mountains in central Colorado. So every summer we'd go down there and go see Sky Sox games all the times. And at that time, in the late 80s, early 90s, it was all the guys who became the stalwarts of the Indians in the 90s. Your Jim Tomes, Carlos Baerga, Kenny Lofton, Sandy Alomar, Joey Bell, as he was known at that time.
We're going to get to that later on,
exactly.
Actually.
So that's why I can be here for both teams, and I do have some Cleveland cred, as it were.
Yeah, you're allowed to have a National League team and an American League team, I think.
Yeah, and again, it hasn't really mattered up except for almost in 2007 when the Rockies made the World Series with that miracle 21 out of 22 win run, and the Indians were up 3-1 on the Red Sox in the ALCS and blew the 3-1 lead, and then the Red Sox went and swept the Rockies. So that could have been one of the greatest moments of my life. Instead, it was one of the worst. So gotta love that.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I'm sure that Rocky fans and Indian fans, unfortunately, have a lot to commiserate over. But we'll get more on that later. Yeah, we're sitting here in the Jake at the since there's no game going on right now, we're allowed in. We're sitting here in John Adams seats, and people may not know the name John Adams, but I bet they know the sound that he produces, the beat of the drum. We're sitting here in the seats at the Jake. So yeah, looking forward to talking about the Cleveland Indians with you here today. They originated way back in 1894 in the Western League. They were the Grand Rapids Rustlers. They relocated to Cleveland in 1900 as the Cleveland Lake Shores. Then they were a charter member of the American League in 1901 as the Cleveland Bluebirds. But then, as was kind of often the case back in the early 1900s, they were named after their manager. They were the Cleveland Naps, after Nap Lajoie, who played for the Indians from 02 to 1914. He was the manager from 1905 to 1909. So I don't know how that worked out. Like, he was player manager for 5 years. Did he get fired as manager and still a player? I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. And the Indians name originated from, after Lajoie was no longer with the club, the club owner, Charlie Summers, wanted the writers to choose a new name. So they went with the Indians, which was a revival of the nickname that fans gave the Cleveland Spiders, which the Cleveland Spiders were a different organization. And they had a player, Luis Sockalexis, who was a Native American who played for that team. And so they were sometimes referred to as the Indians because, that's how they called the Native Americans back then. And, they've been the Indians ever since. like you said, they played at
until now. Yeah.
well, yeah.
Well, until next year.
They originally played in, yeah, as you mentioned, going to games at the Mistake by the Lake, Cleveland Municipal Stadium. And they've been in the Jake, or now it's called Progressive Field, since 1994. I mean, would you call it Progressive Field?
Absolutely not. No, I'm not going to call it the Prague. No, like it's always the Jake. It was such a nice, cool kind of homey style of name. Obviously not named after a brand, as all stadiums are
Right.
now. So it was nice when it was just Jacobs Field, the Jake. And yeah, I'm not going to call it Progressive Field.
Yeah, and I mean they had a great atmosphere, especially there in the mid to late 90s. 455 straight sellouts between June of 95 to April of 01, which at the time was a record. It was broken, I think, by Boston. I don't know if the Giants eclipsed Boston records or not, but yeah, I mean, that's
Boston definitely broke it, but like Fenway Park holds like 25,000 people. Like,
I know
that's nuts. That's a BS record.
Yeah, great atmosphere there in the 90s. What's it like going to games there?
So my first few games at the Jake, it's in the middle of the 90s. We went every summer to visit my my aunt, who still lives in Cleveland, actually visit her out there and see my mom's family. So we went to games every year. And back then, I mean, it was an atmosphere unlike anything really that anybody had seen, except for arguably, oddly enough, the Rockies around that time, because the Rockies that we mentioned on the podcast last time, when they started, they played an old Mile High Stadium, which held 80,000 people,
right?
And they sold out every game. So there was 80,000 people at a baseball game in Coors Field. But really, besides that, the Indians were it, man. Like, they sold out every game. There was such pride for the city, for that team, because really at that time, that was when the Browns had moved away and Art Modell had stolen the Browns away from Cleveland and moved them to Baltimore. And that 4 or 5 year stretch, there was no NFL team in Cleveland. And the Indians at that same time were also arguably the best team in baseball that never won a World Series for that whole late 90s stretch. So, they were able to really capture the hearts of Clevelanders, who are very, very good, very honest, hardworking people and love their sports. It was just a perfect moment for the Indians at that time. Every game was sold out. It was a party every single time you went.
Yeah, and I mean they were watching some good baseball because they won a lot of titles back then, or division titles. Right. They won the Central 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, and then again in 01. Then, as you mentioned, they had that playoff run in 07. They won the division then. They also won it in 16, 17, and 18. They also had a couple wild card appearances in 2013 and just this past year in 2020.
Yeah, and also in that stretch, by the way, I'll interrupt for a second. In that stretch too, they had 2 seasons where they won 93 games and didn't make the playoffs, which is the only team ever to have done that, is to win that many games and not make the playoffs in the wild card era.
Yeah,
like the 05 Indians won 93 games, finished second to the White Sox, who won the World Series that year. And 2019, they won 93 games, finished second to the Twins, did not make the playoffs. So it's there's been a lot of success in Cleveland, considering their modest payroll and all that.
So. Absolutely, and they've got 3 pennants in this time frame going back to 95, which occurred in 95, 97, and 2016. They've got 6 total. They came up short in each of those World Series, as they don't have a World Series in this era. They do have 2 total, 1920 and 1948. Going back to 48 is actually the longest current drought for teams that have won a World Series. There's teams that have never won, or the Mariners have never even been to the World Series. So those teams who have never won are not counted. So teams that have won, this is actually the longest drought. And another thing of note, that they have a 22-game win streak, which occurred in 2017, which is the longest winning streak in the American League. And it's only eclipsed by, I think, like the the New York Giants or
Well,
somebody. But
and that
yeah.
streak had ties in it. Like, trust
Mhm.
me, as a researcher for for a major network, having to deal with all of that BS during that, going like, oh, well, it's the longest streak. Well, actually, like, no, it's the longest winning streak in
Yeah,
baseball history.
not
Like,
the
because
longest.
the Giants had ties in their streak. That does not count in my opinion. That's not a winning streak. You had ties in there. It's not a winning streak.
It's what do they say in hockey? Like is it an undefeated streak?
Right, an unbeaten streak.
Right. Yeah.
So sure, if you want to language just language it that way, fine, do it. But it is the longest winning streak.
That's
Yes.
good. Yeah, exactly. And they've got a rich history. Some of their retired numbers: 3 is retired for Earl Averill, 5 for Lou Boudreau, 14 for Larry Doby, the first black player in the American League, who started playing in the American League shortly after Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier. 18 is retired for Mel Harder. 19 for Rapid Robert Bob Feller, the only opening day no-hitter. 20 retired for Frank Robinson, 21 for Bob Lemon. And Frank Robinson, I think he was the first African-American manager when he managed
he was
the
a
Indians.
player manager, speaking of what we were talking about then.
Yeah. 21 for Bob Lemon, 25 for Jim Thome, and then of course 42 for Jackie Robinson, which is retired throughout baseball. So yeah, some rich history there.
But they also have
names.
455 retired for
That's right,
the streak. They actually the number up there with the retired numbers, 455.
Yeah, so a rich history there for the Indians, and then we'll get to some more personnel coming right up. Let's get into the trivia question this week. And when we do, we always go over last week's trivia question. We were talking about the White Sox last week, and there were a couple opening day related questions for the White Sox. So in the past quarter century, the White Sox have had Frank Thomas, Paul Konerko, or Jose Abreu start at first base every year except 1998. Who was the opening day starter at first base for the White Sox in 1998?
Boy, so Frank would have been a DH.
Yeah, he actually started at DH that day.
Like, they wouldn't have been like they put Harold Baines there, was it, that time? He wouldn't have been there.
No.
Who was first base for it?
This was a random one. It was completely it was Greg Norton.
Greg Norton, oh boy. Who that went on to be a great pinch hitter for the Rockies a few years later.
He Brett Ballantini, who was the guest last week, actually got that one correct.
Wow.
And then the other part of the trivia question, also opening day starter related, from 2002 to 2011, Mark Burley was the opening day starting pitcher for every year except 2007. Who started in 2007 opening day for the White Sox?
2007, like John Garland?
It was not Garland. Brett Ballantini guessed Javier Vasquez, which was also incorrect. Jose Contreras.
It was one of the four. It was because they had that stretch where they had like the ALCS against the Angels in 2005, right? When they had 4 complete games. It was Bert Burleigh, Freddie Garcia, Contreras, and Garland, I think. Those numbers from that run they had in 2005 were nuts.
Yeah. And so that brings us to this week's trivia question. I know when you were the guest for the Rockies podcast, you nailed it. This one is also a multi-parter.
Okay.
So we'll see if you can maybe leave some of these answers for the listeners to get to. So Jacobs Field began play in 1994, as we mentioned. Usually I like to keep the trivia within the past quarter century. So we're going back just an extra year.
Close enough.
So this is a thing of firsts for Jacobs Field. So who threw out the ceremonial first pitch?
Ooh.
Who hit the first grand slam in Jacobs Field? First inside the park home run? First unassisted triple play? And first no hitter?
Oh boy.
Okay, so first ceremonial first pitch.
First pitch. Well, it would have been somebody Cleveland related, right? Or was it like Bob Feller? Did Feller throw the first? Was he still there? Is he still alive? I have no idea. Like, I have no idea with that one.
Yeah, Bob Feller, they got him off of, he was on the street throwing pitches
Yeah.
against racing motorcycles, and
Yeah,
they brought him on.
They brought him in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, remember, I'll reveal the answers next week. So listeners, if you want to chime into the conversation, throw your answers out there on social media. But is Bob Feller your guest for ceremonial first pitch?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
He might have been completely dead by then. I have no idea.
Even if he was, I bet he could still throw 65.
I'm sure he could.
First Grand Slam.
Boy, the easy answer is Tomei, right?
That's, I think, the obvious. I mean, again, I'm not going to say if it's right or wrong, but and then first inside the park home run.
Boy, they had a lot of speedsters. Obviously, we'll get into Kenny Lofton, but I don't. He didn't have too many inside the parkers. It's probably somebody like, I mean, like Matt Lawton or something like that.
Okay. And then let's see. First unassisted triple play, which, I mean, I would probably expect to be the only unassisted triple play. I don't know how many of those occur.
If it's the only one, then it says Drupal Cabrera.
Okay.
But I'm not sure if that's the only one. I know for a fact he got one at the Jake, I believe in 07 or 08. So
okay. And first no hitter.
So the only one I can even think of right now off the top of my head is Irvin Santana.
Okay. All right. Good guesses. So again, I will say, so what do we have? 1, 2, 3. We have 5 parts to that trivia question. You hit 400 out of those 5.
Hey, that's I'm in the Hall of Fame. Then I'll take it.
It's good. I mean, that was impressive. I won't say which 2 you got right, but
sure.
two out of those 5. Listeners, again, you want to chime in, hop on. So let's get into the Indians again. Now they were owned by Richard Jacobs from 86 to 2000. That's where we get the name, the Jacobs Field. And now the Dolan family, Larry with his sons Paul and Matt, have owned the team since 2000. I mean, we could go on and on and on about, about the owners. So let's get the Reader's Digest version of your opinion on the owners.
Well, let's nowadays the Indians obviously are very cheap, and they have been for a minute. 10, 15, 20 years. They act like a small market team, even, and they, you can argue that they are, but they also work in the parameters that there's never going to be enough money. So what they've done over, the 20, 30 years or so, really, they've done a phenomenal job of identifying talent with either their team, college, prep, Latin America, other teams. They do a great job of that. They do a great job of developing talent as of late. So they're very good in the draft for the most part. They're very good at stealing players from other teams in trades, and they scout Latin America well, which is what you have to do if you're not going to spend money, which is what they're not going to do. And when you do get talent coming up in the system, they've done a pretty good job of signing those guys, buying out their arbitration years with their young talent, keeping them around for 6-year. $40 million contracts or whatever they may, something along those lines. We buy their arbitration years, set them for life. They'll still be 27 or 28 when they're free agents, and then you move on from there. So they have a business model. I'm trying to be polite. They have a business model, and it works. You can't argue that it doesn't work. I mean, really, since they hired Francona in 2013, they have the most wins in the American League as a franchise over the last 8 years. Only the Dodgers have more in all of baseball. So it's hard to say that what they're doing doesn't work. Obviously, it sucks to know that, like, even 3-4 years ago, that a guy like Francisco Lindor, a transformational player for a franchise, was never going to resign, even though he wanted to stay. The people in charge wanted him to stay, but they're never going to fork over the money that he was going to be worth. So, you trade him now for, whatever they end up getting. Again, the guys they got, Jimenez and Rosario might play better, and the two prospects they got might hit. Who knows? Who cares at some point? It's always just how their franchise is going to be run. But like I said, it's hard to argue when they are a quote unquote small market team with that much consistent success over the last decade or plus. I mean, really, the 2010 wasn't a very strong decade. They had the run in 07,
Mm-hmm.
but really, since they got Francona in 2013, they've operated in the bottom half of baseball and payroll, and yet been the most successful team in the American League. So, yeah, they haven't won a World Series, but their model works for them, and there's no reason why the Dolans would ever change that at this point, unless the model stops working, which it seems to be going along just fine for them. So,
is there another Dolan? Are they're related to the Mets, or not the Mets, the Knicks, right?
Yeah.
Are they like fighting for like who's the worst sports owner in the family?
So here's the thing with that. Like Larry Dolan, or Paul Dolan. Paul Dolan's the Knicks run, right? I believe.
Paul's Larry's son. I don't know if maybe his
so
brother's Paul
whatever,
too. I don't know.
It's easy Google search. That's not important. The Knicks Dolan is a meddler, and he is loud, and he's obnoxious, and he goes to the media and all this stuff. And the Indians Dolans, the worst you've ever gotten out of them publicly in statements is, well, I think before 2019, maybe 2020 season, when it's going to happen like normal. They were asking about Lindor maybe signing an extension or whatever, and they said that was probably not going to happen. And someone asked, "What do you want to do for a fan base who wants to watch Francisco Lindor play for the next 10 years?" And they just go, "Well, enjoy him now." Which, this isn't like a Kevin Mather situation for the Mariners. That dude who got himself fired, they don't do things like that. So you have to appreciate it that it doesn't run in the family with the Dolans, because you see the mess the Knicks have been for 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
The Indians haven't been that. Like, they're cheap, and that's fine, I guess. but they're not. They don't run their organization horribly in that regard. Now, the other stuff with the name and the Indians moniker and Chief Wahoo, that's a different story altogether. If you want to get at the Dolans and all them for keeping that around for way too long, or just knuckle dragging until they finally couldn't anymore, until they hit the core of the earth, then fine. You can be mad at them for that, and you have absolutely every right to be. But for day-to-day operations and stuff, they are a pretty consistently run front office. They've always had their GMs or presidents or whatever. They've always been great at finding young talent, getting better jobs. John Hart, Mark Shapiro, Chris Antonetti, who's there now. Like, all these guys, they've gone on to do huge things other places, and they've been fantastic. Even Dan O'Dowd, but like they've been able to discover talent wherever it is, whether it's for a front office, for a player, for whatever, for a coach. Even they do a lot of things well, and a lot of things they need to do well in order to maintain competitiveness with a small payroll nowadays.
Right. Yeah. And you answered, the next kind of question about the GM. So you named him off. John Hart was there for a decade, from 91 to 01. A lot of stability there. Mark Shapiro, who you also mentioned, he was there as the GM from 01 to 2010. Then he was the team president for 5 years after that, from 2010 to 2015. Chris Antonetti from 2010 to 2015 as the GM. He's currently the president of baseball operations, and Mike Chernoff has been the GM for the past 5 years. So
and all those guys have done fantastic jobs, really,
right,
for the most part. And now Shapiro's in Toronto, and they've totally rebuilt that franchise now through the draft and trades and everything. And now they're going for this year and signing players to contracts like the Indians did. The Indians, when they had to sign players, they did. If they thought they were that close, they would make an unpopular trade or sign a guy to a decent money deal. But like, that's just not their MO.
Yeah, the front office has done a great job considering the restraints from ownership. As you mentioned, they've done a great job in finding talent and acquiring that, whether it be through the draft, through trades, through the international free agent market. Yeah, it's just been the unwillingness to keep those players after that team control.
Yeah, exactly. Like, if they got Lindor for, they paid him some bigger money for his couple of Zarb years, but no, they were not going to give him a $300 million contract. I mean, that's something they will absolutely not do. I could look, I'm sure, but like, I don't even know the last, $100 million contract they gave out, if they've ever even given one out. Honestly, I have no idea. I can't imagine they've done that.
Yeah, nothing pops in my head.
Right. Yeah.
And now, so that's the front office. Let's get down onto the fields. I've got a little tidbit about each manager and see if you can identify it. This first one, I'm pretty confident you'll get this one. It is a manager who has a player. He was nicknamed HRD, the Human Rain Delay.
Grover, Mike Hargrove.
Yeah. So he was there for that great stretch in the 90s from 91 to 99. Then they had a manager who, as an amateur back in high school, he actually turned down basketball scholarship offers and apparently an academic scholarship to Penn, and to go play pro baseball. Part of that was he needed to start working to take care of his mother and his siblings, as well as he was also at a young age married and had a child.
It's a tough way. It's a tough way to go about your life. Yeah. So Charlie Manuel came right after Grover, right?
Yeah, that would be him.
Yeah.
And he was there for just a few years from 2002. He went on to later success with the Phillies. And then after Charlie Manuel, they had a manager who was on a state championship high school baseball team. That was Northrop High School in Fort Wayne, Indiana in 83, and a College World Series winning collegiate team that was Wichita State in 1989.
Wedgie, Eric Wedge.
Yeah, so he was there, Eric Wedge, from 03 to 09. Then they had a manager who, in the minor leagues, he was a player coach in the Astros organization for a year.
Yeah, Manny Acta. His was probably the least successful tenure of any of the managers in that time.
Yeah, 2010 to 2012, and then now their current manager is somebody who missed managing the 2017 All-Star game because he was recovering from a procedure to correct an irregular heartbeat.
Dude, Terry Francona, he's had a million things happen to him, staph infections and gangrene and COVID and all this other stuff. Like, I don't know how he's still kicking it, man, but he's in camp right now, and he's, as ornery as ever, basically. Like, he's just one of, like, that's the thing with, with some of the guys that they've come through as managers, like Hargrove and Charlie Manuel and Francona, just beloved characters in Major League Baseball. Like, everyone loves Hargrove, everyone loved Charlie Manuel, loves Tito, like, I feel like Eric Wedge too, but like, it was, really, he's the guys that they bring in, especially when they have to deal with constraints of ownership, you need to have a guy who's capable of running a tight ship, but who can also understand the ins and outs of what it takes to do a full 6-month season. And, it's going to take some, kicking some guys' asses sometimes, going to take coddling some guys, going to take, taking a back seat sometimes, and the guys who manage that well, especially in a place like Cleveland, is going to really do well, and that's what all those guys have done for the most part.
Yeah, and I know that Theo Epstein gets a lot of credit for, ending the drought, the World Series drought in both Boston and Chicago. But I mean, Terry Francona was a game away from being a manager to end 2 of those droughts, because he was a manager in Boston and he almost ended the drought in Cleveland. And then
I'm aware. I was there. I'm very aware.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, a lot of successful managers there, some great managers, and just coming right up, we'll talk about some of the players that they were managing. It's time to look at this quarter century roster that I've assembled for the Indians. And a quick reminder to our listeners, the parameters for creating these rosters. You can go back 25 years. So the time frame is 1995 to 2019, as this was done prior to the 2020 season. You pick one player per year, cannot repeat players, and you must form a coherent roster. Starting off at the catching position, I've got Victor Martinez from 05. He was worth over 5 wins. He hit 20 bombs. Got on base at a good clip. He had 305, 378, 475. So great offensive production from the catcher. At first base, Jim Thome from 02, he was worth 7.4 wins, 52 bombs, 19 doubles there. Led the league in walks with 122. Also led the league in slugging, OPS, and OPS plus at 677.
Monster.
OPS over 1100. OPS plus of 197.
Goodness, man.
Wow. Second base, we've got Robbie Alomar, the switch hitter from 01. He was a Gold Glover and an All-Star. He also, I mean, he's a tremendous defensive second baseman, but he also drove in over 100, swiped 30 bags, hit 336, got on base at a 415 clip, slugged over 500. So, I mean, there's a reason why he's in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
At third base, we got another switch hitter, Jose Ramirez, in 2018. He was worth hair over 7.5 wins, 39 bombs, 38 doubles to go along with 34 stolen bases for Jose Ramirez. And then at shortstop, Frankie Lindor, another switch hitter, a lot of versatility on this infield. Lindor from 2019, he was worth 5 wins, 32 bombs, 40 doubles, 22 bags, 284, 335, 518 triple slash. He was an all-star and a Gold Glover there. I mean, we got an impressive infield here, Anthony.
Yeah. And, Lindor's 2018, I would say was even better. He had almost worth 8 wins that year. 277, 352, 519. He had 38 bombs, 42 doubles. He won a platinum glove that year, or one of the years he won a platinum glove. He put up numbers that were unparalleled, and especially that position for a guy in Cleveland. So to see, I mean, he put up ridiculous numbers, but like Jose Ramirez is the guy that people don't understand how good he really is, because he came up and he was kind of a slap hitter. He's super small. What is he listed at? Even like Jose Ramirez is actually listed at 5'9", 190. He's like Ronnie Belliard. He's just a bowling ball. You just like you like put him down like this and put him in your pocket, just squeeze him down. And he just gets more constricted. It's amazing. But like he's last year he finished second in the MVP voting.
Mm-hmm.
In the truncated season, he had 17 home runs, 993 OPS. Previous year, 23 bombs, 24 stolen bases. But yeah, that 2017 season. I think you mentioned 2018 season, 2017 season. Yeah, 2017, 56 doubles, 29 homers, and 957 OPS. You could have picked any number of seasons for Jose Ramirez.
It was tough, yeah. With Ramirez, Lindor, and Kluber. We'll get to that later on.
But he really, like, he came out kind of out of nowhere, because he was a guy that the Indians had more like organizational filler for a while. And then, he was so young when he came up. He was 20 when his debut, but like you didn't see the pop at all until his 4th or 5th year.
Mm-hmm.
In the big leagues. He was still young. He was still 24 when his 2017 season, but he's finished in the top 3 of MVP voting 3 times. Like Lindor can't say that, but Jose Ramirez can.
Yeah.
Jose Ramirez finished in the top 3 MVP voting literally 3 times in his career, and he's only 28. He's their best player right now.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of last year, you couldn't get him out.
No, you couldn't. Yeah, I mean, he almost won MVP. Like Abreu had the hot start, and Ramirez had the hot finish, and they were very, very close.
Yeah. And we'll continue with some impressive offensive output as we get into the outfield. Albert Bell in 95.
Oof, boy.
He was worth 7 wins. He was an all-star and a silver slugger. And I mean, it's obvious why he was a silver slugger. Led the league in runs with 121. I think the only 50-50 season in MLB history with 52 doubles.
It is, and it was in a shortened season.
Yeah.
It was in a 144-game season after the strike in 94. Opening day wasn't until late April that year. It is still the only 50-50 season in MLB history, and he didn't win the MVP that year because Mo Vaughn had a lot of RBI. and he wasn't a super dick.
Yeah, that was I mean, I think there was probably about a dozen guys who probably should have won it over Mo Vaughn at least.
Yes.
And Albert Bell
but Albert was a renowned prick.
Yeah.
So, and that clearly hurt him there because he put up offensive numbers that literally no other, like nobody has seen, especially in a shortened season, and did not win the MVP that year. On the best team, it was a 144 game season, and that Indians team went 144. That's how good that team was.
Unreal, yeah.
Yeah.
52 doubles, 50 home runs, 126 RBIs. These all led the league. 690 slugging and 377 total bases all led the league. Just
Monster.
Ridiculous. Kenny Lofton in center field from 98.
Be still my heart.
Had let's see, 54 stolen bases that year, 282, 371, 413, triple slash to go along with some great defense there in center field for Kenny Lofton. In right field, Manny Ramirez, a young Manny Ramirez from 99, drove in 165 runs, hit 44 bombs, led the league in RBI, slugging, OPS, and OPS plus, as the OPS plus 174, OPS about 1100, slugged over 660. And at DH, Travis Hafner, the lefty from
Gronk.
04, worth 5 wins. He hit 28 home runs, led the league in OPS plus at 162. Also led the league with 17 hit by pitches. I love that.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, just powerful outfield there, and with some gazelle-like speed in center.
Yeah, I mean, they're not going to win any Gold Gloves in left and right, but Kenny Lofton can cover both left and right at the same time. That's how good he was. I mean, really, like this lineup, I would put this lineup against any team's top lineup from this time frame since '95. I'm taking this lineup over arguably any team based on just the guys that they've had there coming through there and the numbers they put up. It's hard to beat that lineup. No
doubt, they are impressive. And then on the bench, we've got Jason Kipnis from 2013, triple slash 284, 366, 452. Asdrubal Cabrera from 09, worth 4.2 wins. He got some speed, played some solid defense there. Yeah. And Grady Sizemore from 06 in the outfield. Led the league in runs with 134 and doubles with 53.
Still, the only home run ball I've ever caught in my life is a Grady Sizemore home run ball from 2008. Yeah,
nice. And then
he was so good.
The backup catcher Sandy Alomar from 97. He hit 324, 354, 545. So Alomar, along with Victor Martinez, some nice catching duo there. And yeah, Sizemore, it's kind of like what could have been with his career, but
God, yeah,
he's a great year here. I mean, you put him in for defense for Bell or Manny, one of those guys or something. Yeah, this is a nice team.
Well, and Grady Sizemore is one of the biggest what ifs of the last 20, 30 years, man. Like he did things that people were like, they were to build a team around him at that point. I think it was like 05 or 06, even SI had him on their cover being like, why Sizemore matters, and like it was, he was just a great guy, a 5-tool player, young, handsome. He had Grady's ladies, a whole cheering section at the Jake at that point. Like, it sucks that team wasn't better. I know in 07 he was a part of that team, obviously, that went to the we're one win away from the World Series, but the teams that he was great on weren't better because he was such a great player, and then just his body just betrayed him, which is it's such a shame. He always kept trying to catch on with a million other teams, would have a couple of weeks where he'd play well and like, oh, maybe he's back, and then he got hurt again. It sucks because he was so fun to watch. People forget about him since his heyday was 15 years ago now, but boy, he was fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll get into the pitching staff now, starting off with CC Sabathia in 07. He was worth about 6.5 wins. He went 19-7, led the league with 34 starts and 241 innings. Also led the league in strikeouts per walk at 5.65. He was the Cy Young Award winner and an All-Star. In 08, they got another Cy Young Award winner, Cliff Lee, led the league as he went 22-3, led the league with an ERA of around 2.5. 2 shutouts led the league. His ERA plus of 167 and FIP of 283 led the league. He kept the ball in the yard, and he was stingy with the walk, as he led the league in both home runs per 9 at 0.5 and walks per 9 at 1.4. And then another Cy Young Award winner, Corey Kluber, in 2017, 7.9 wins is what he was worth. He went 18-4, led the league with those 18 wins, and his ERA at 2.25, 5 complete games, 3 shutouts, ERA plus of 202. I mean, his whip was just minuscule at 0.87, hits per 9, 6.2, 1.6 walks per 9, 7.36 strikeouts per walk. All those led the league. So, I mean, it's easy to see why the Klubot was the Cy Young Award winner.
God, yeah.
Here's a familiar name for you, Justin Masterson in 2011.
Who?
Is that a coincidence? We got a Masterson here?
It is not a coincidence. In fact, he is a first cousin of mine for all your listeners.
Did he get all the athletic genes in the family?
Clearly, I mean, he's the one that pitched in the big leagues for 10 years.
Yeah,
you know, and I said to talk about it. You know, so yeah, no, yeah. I mean, Justin is also one of the nicest people in the entire world. His dad, my uncle, was a minister. He's big into charity. He's gone over to Africa to build homes for people there. Like, he really is one of the nicest human beings that you'll ever possibly meet. And I got a good trivia question for you, Billy.
Mm-hmm.
And some of your listeners might find this interesting. Justin Masterson was the first ever Jamaican born pitcher in Major League Baseball.
I have I did know that he was born there. I've perused his Baseball Reference page before, and you see that it stands out.
So he is a 6'6", 250-pound, completely bald white dude who was the first ever Jamaican-born pitcher. My uncle was doing missionary work there when he was born. Lived there until he was about 2 or 3, and then moved to the States. They lived around outside of Dayton, Ohio, when he grew up. But yeah, like him and Chili Davis are like tied because they're the first Jamaican-born players. But except Chili Davis, it makes sense, and Justin, it does not. But that's why he got the nickname coming up through college and everything of Mr. Clean, because he looked of his striking resemblance to the cleansing product logo.
That's great. And Masterson, he went 12-10 there with an ERA of 3.21 in 2011. And then rounding out the rotation, Bartolo Colon from 2000, he went 15-8.
And he's still pitching somewhere.
15-8, ERA of 3.88. This was a young Bartolo back when he threw Chet. He struck out 212 in 188 innings. I mean, you got to love those 3 Cy Youngs in the rotation here.
Dude, I mean, and the funny thing was that Cliff Lee was so bad in 2007, the year before he won the Cy Young, that he was left off the playoff roster. He had like an ERA in the high 6s. He got sent down. There was very much an issue between him and management that was pretty public. He did not care for how they ran their business. And so he said, fine, I have 1 more year left my contract. I'm going to come back and have a great year in 08 and then leave. And he did. And he won the Cy Young. And then after that, Cliff Lee was a nice pitcher up until then in his career. But then he had the 08 season. And then the rest of his career, he was like borderline Hall of Fame type of pitcher for the rest of his career. So whatever happened there, it fueled him for the rest of his career, and what a great one it was.
And now in the bullpen, I got Eric Plunk from 96.
Great name for a reliever.
Yeah. He went 3-2 out of the pen, ERA under 2.5. He can go more than an inning, 77 2/3 innings in 56 appearances. David Risky from 03.
Again, great name for a reliever. Plunk and Risky. Yeah.
ERA of right about 2 1/3, 74 2/3 innings in 68 appearances. He struck out over a batter an inning. So did Plunk. Chris Perez from 2010, He went 2-2 with a 1.71 ERA, 23 saves. He struck out about a batter an inning, 61 Ks in 63 innings.
Chris Perez also famous for getting arrested for having marijuana delivered to his house, addressed to his dog.
Didn't he endear himself well to Indians fans? What did he say about the attendance there?
Yeah, Chris Perez was not a well-liked player in Cleveland. He was very good for the time that he was there for the most part. He was not a well-liked guy in that time.
Vinny Pestano in 2012, he was worth about 2.5 wins, 3-3 ERA of about 2.5. Struck out just over a batter an inning.
And then they traded him for a little-known player named Mike Clevenger.
Interesting.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. You know, like how the Indians go about getting all their players. They traded Vinny Pestano at a deadline deal, got some unknown young kid named Mike Clevenger, who then turned out to be a Cy Young candidate for a few years.
Who was that trade with?
The Angels.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And then Andrew Miller. Here's another. This guy, was he traded to or from Cleveland?
So that was a deadline deal in 2016. They sent Clint Frazier, who was their top prospect at the time, to the Yankees for Andrew Miller because the Indians were very good. They knew they had a bullpen issue because they had Cody Allen in the 9th. Brian Shaw was good then in the 7th, but they needed a little bridge. And Andrew Miller he had turned himself into the best reliever, a jack of all trades kind of thing in baseball at that time. And he could have put the Indians over the top, and he did. I mean, Andrew Miller in that run 2016 was unbelievable in the last couple of months that he had with the Indians. And then into the playoffs, he won ALCS MVP that year. He was that good as a reliever, won ALCS MVP. Not even a closer, just a generic reliever, because he would come in the 4th, he would come in the 7th, he would come in the 9th, he would come in whenever the situation dictated it. Francona used him very well. He was as unhittable as you've seen a pitcher in that time. Look at his numbers: 46 strikeouts, 2 walks.
Yeah.
In 26 games. Like, are you kidding me? Like, come on. In 29 innings.
Ridiculous.
46-2. Like, come on. He was. It was one of those things where the Indians, where they rarely do something like this, where they mortgage the future for the present, and they did it then, and it did work. They didn't win the World Series, obviously, but Andrew Miller was one of the main reasons they got to where they did. So it is what it is. But
yeah, and I mean, he accumulated 1.4 WAR in that short a time.
In 2 months. Yeah.
Ridiculous. And then a couple other guys you just mentioned to round out the pen. Cody Allen in 2014, he went 6-4, ERA of about 2. He had 24 saves for the Indians. 91 strikeouts in 69 2/3 innings.
Just retired like 2 days ago.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
but he was so good for them for so long. Yeah.
And Brian Shaw in 2015, 3-3, ERA under 3 in 64 innings for the Indians. So yeah, I mean,
he was Francona's guy that he every game Brian Shaw would be in, which is why when the Rockies eventually paid for him, his arm was shot. Which, that's a buyer beware thing for them. But he had that wipeout cutter and the slider, and he just pitched every day. and Tito would go to him every day, and it worked. He was really, really good for a long time. But there enough bullets were thrown out of that gun that he didn't have much left when he got to Denver.
Yeah. So this is the back end of the pen again with Shaw, Allen, Miller. Pretty impressive there.
So yeah, there's a reason why they got where they did.
Yep. So yeah, that's the roster that we've got for the Cleveland Indians.
Yeah. So that the WAR you accumulate, where does that 122.7 rank? Because that seems like it would be a pretty good team.
It's on the upper half.
Yeah.
The leader, the highest one, is actually 140.
Huh.
And then we've got like 133, about 133, 134, 134. And then they're kind of after that. So it's on the upper third.
God damn.
Yeah. But it's and it's tough because WAR is there's no perfect stat. Sure. If you just have one, this as well as anybody. But it's the one that kind of encompasses the most, so it's you got to take it with a grain of salt, like anything, right?
Sure. Yeah.
But it's
Yeah. It's not perfect, and it varies from site to site, like
mhm,
what the war would be. So yeah, I mean, it's a great jumping off point. That's why I always use
exactly.
whenever I'm forced to make the argument for analytics when we're doing a meeting or whatever with some X-ball players, and I'm forced to be on the side of the numbers. I always say that. I never say it's a finite thing. I always say it's a jumping off point to
Hmm.
see where we can, why these guys were clearly good. There's a reason why the war leaderboards at the end of the year are almost always all stars.
Exactly.
So if you put it to them in terms they can understand in that regard, or that they can grasp quickly, like there's a reason why, like someone asked me about run differential once. It was like, yo, what does run differential matter? And I was like, well, yeah, it does. There's a reason why the top teams run differential every year are always in the playoffs. And he thought about it and he goes, okay, cool. I'll remember that from now on. It's like, well, it's always going to score runs instead of allowing other runs and blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, it's like, hey, the teams that score runs and a good run differential, they're always in the playoffs. Cool. Got it. Done. Perfect.
Exactly. So, Anthony, I know that I could not get everybody I wanted on this roster. And, that happens every time I put these rosters together. When you follow these constrictions, it's just tough to fit everyone onto that puzzle. So, I'm sure there's guys that you see that I miss. So, who are some names that you see that you would kind of expect to be on here, but we're not?
Well, it's when you're putting together a roster, it's hard to leave out a guy like Michael Brantley. We'll start with the position players. Michael Brantley, who is still playing and doing very well. He was just like a consistent, solid threat, and he had great years with the Indians. He's still having great years with the Astros now. But he was he was the guy that the player to be named later in the CC Sabathia deal for the Brewers when they sent him there in 08. Matt Laporta was the big prospect getting back from Milwaukee, but it was only contingent if Sabathia led the Brewers to the playoffs. The Indians would get their pick of what ended up being Michael Brantley, and they wanted Michael Brantley. So they said if the Brewers make the playoffs, the Indians get Michael Brantley back. But if they don't, then they had a pick of 3 other guys that they were going to grab. So CC Sabathia pitched like a Cy Young winner for the Brewers that year. He pitched like every third day, won 11 games in 2 months or 3 months, whatever.
It won my fantasy baseball team the
Yeah,
championship that year.
exactly. Yeah. And got the Brewers to the playoffs. And so
Mm-hmm.
the Indians got Michael Brantley, and he turned into a very, very great player for them for a long time. And his 2014, he had 327, 385, 506 that year, 20 home runs, 97 runs batted in. He had 7 wins above replacement that year. He was very good. Shin-Soo Choo had some great years with some bad Indians teams as well. High on base guy. He actually just not retired. He's going to play in Korea now. But he was just a good soldier for so long, and I can't. He was still kicking around because he was just a 15 to 20 home run guy with a like 420 on base percentage. Like he was just that kind of player with a rocket arm in the outfield as well. One thing I do want to say though is Kenny Lofton was like my favorite player in baseball growing up. The first few instances I had at a pro baseball game, Kenny Lofton made some unbelievable play, robbed a home run, whatever. The first game I ever went to, he robbed George Brett of a home run back when I was like 6 years old. There was a play, the home run robbery that he had that was probably his most famous one against the Orioles back in '97, where I was actually in attendance at that game, and it made like at that time Sports Center is like one of the top 100 plays of the century or whatever, and I was at that game. So he put together a career that should have easily been Hall of Fame worthy, in my opinion.
Mine as well.
And he dropped off the ballot without 5% of the vote the first time he was on. It was
Baffling.
a private ballot, I understand, but that was absolutely baffling. And I believe there was treachery afoot. I'm sure we'll find that out at some point. He should get in at some with the Veterans Committee or something like that, because his career was too impressive not to let that happen. I mean, who's a 68 WAR player as a center fielder in the time of Griffey and Andrew Jones. Kenny Lofton was always in the playoffs with whatever team he played for: Cleveland, Chicago, San Francisco, the Cubs, Yankees, Phillies, Dodgers. Like, he was always in the playoffs no matter who he played for. He was always a winning player on a winning team, career 299 hitter, stole 600 plus bases. He was a 372 career on base percentage. He was always a player who you wanted on your team. He could do so many things for you. He was a phenomenal defender in center field. Won 4 Gold Gloves, All-Star multiple times. It's ridiculous that he was dropped off the ballot without getting the 5% of the vote the first time. And I want to know, I want someone to do a deep dive on it who's smarter than me about what the hell happened there. I mean, even his last year, he was 40. He was on the Indians team in 07 that almost went to the World Series. And for the Indians that year, he came over from Texas in the midseason. It was like his last thing. He was 40 years old, hit 283 in 200 at bats. He got some big hits in the postseason that year. He was pretty much the same player that he always was, and couldn't get a job the next year. Couldn't sniff a job.
Didn't he only have like one collegiate at bat or something? What was it? He
was on the Arizona Final Four
88,
basketball team.
Right?
In 88.
Was it 88? Starting point guard
with Sean Elliott. Yeah. So he was in the dunk contest that year at the Final Four. Like, Kenny Lofton was just an absurd athlete.
Yeah, no doubt.
And I mean, he led the league in stolen bases each of his first 5 seasons in the league. Like, I want to know what happened there, because he was always my favorite player growing up, and he deserves justice at some point.
Okay. Any other names? So Brantley was a miss.
Brantley, Chu, and Lofton for sure.
Yeah. Any pitchers or anyone?
So yeah. So it's hard to talk about the Indians of the mid 90s, mid to late 90s that went to the World Series and all that without talking about Charles Nagy. Charles Nagy was, he's one of those guys who look at his overall numbers, you're like, oh, whatever. He just had a lot of, pitcher wins, blah, blah, blah. Because ZRA was like, in the 4s most of the time. But in the era, and with the offense the Indians scored, he kept that team in the game all the time. He was a guy who would win 15 games every year, hashtag pitcher wins. But his era was in the low 4s or mid 4s, whatever, because this team would score him 10 runs a game. But they did that for 10 straight years. Like, it was like there was a number at some point, like it was only him and Greg Maddux to win 15 games every year for like a 9-year stretch, because he played with the Indians. Maddux did it because Maddux was one of the best pitchers of all time, arguably. And Nagy did it because he was just one of those guys who was able just to keep his team in the game. He didn't have amazing stuff. He didn't strike out 1,000 players. He didn't throw 100 miles an hour, but like he was an opening day starter like almost every year he was there. He was a dependable guy, an old veteran they always had on their team. He was always incredibly good. And now it sucks that he was on the mound for the Renteria walk-off in 97 because he came out of the bullpen because he was trying to get his team some length, at that point. But I mean, his 96.
Yeah.
He was 17-5 that year, but he had a 3.4 that year, which is, very good for him, but 167 punch outs and 222 innings. You look at those numbers now and you're like, oh, what a joke that guy was. No, like, of the era and for the team that he played for, he was the perfect embodiment of that pitching staff and that team at that time. Other guy we didn't mention was Foster Carmona, or Roberto Hernandez, as he is now. When he came up, he had a couple of phenomenal years. That 07 year, he was like borderline Cy Young with Sabathia at the top of that rotation. 19-8 with 306, just that bowling ball sinker. It felt like you were getting like hit with a lead balloon when you tried to swing at that thing. He had the famous game with the midges in the division series against the Yankees, where Jabba and A-Rod and Jeter were just batting their necks and couldn't figure out how to play with some bugs. And there's those stoic shots of Carmona just having bugs crawling all over his face and striking out Bernie Williams. Just like, oh god, what a stud that guy was. He had some really great years, I will say. So, and then a sentimental favorite, Carlos Carrasco of mine. They just got traded with the Indians to the Mets with Lindor, but he was like a heartbeat for that team for so long. And a lot of people forget that when the Indians traded Cliff Lee to the Phillies in 2009, Carrasco was the centerpiece. You know, it was a very unpopular trade, obviously, trading the reigning Cy Young Award winner. Lee went to the World Series with the Phillies that year. But, you know, they got back like Jason Donald and all these guys that didn't, and Lou Marson, and guys that didn't pan out. But Carrasco was the centerpiece. He was the best pitching prospect for the Phillies at that time. And he came over and he sucked. Like, I mean, he was bad. He was for like 3 or 4 years. And you're like, well, that trade was the worst trade in franchise history. And they at that point were calling it like the Rocky Colavito trade, when the curse of Colavito, when they traded Colavito to the Tigers, I believe, and have never won a World Series since. It was seen as that bad of a trade. And then Carrasco, I think it was like in 13 or 14, got with some pitching coaches and decided to go from the stretch and use his, you know, fastball more or whatever. And I'm you know, crystallizing it down in a very dumb way, but like, he made it the adjustments to become a good pitcher in the big leagues, and then all of a sudden he turned into one of the better pitchers in the big leagues for a long time. You know, he in 2016 with the World Series team, he was on his way to being number 2 behind Kluber that year, and took a line drive off his forearm in mid-September of that year, broke his arm, couldn't pitch in the playoffs. So that hamstrung the Indians. You know, they would have won the World Series, in my opinion, very easily if they would have had Carlos Carrasco there, instead of having to pitch, you know, one-handed Trevor Bauer and Josh Tomlin every third day. Like, besides Corey Kluber, they would have won the World Series easily, in my opinion. And then, you know, he had leukemia diagnosis a couple of years ago, you know, came back later that year to pitch. You know, it was an unbelievable scene. And then to come back last year and have an ERA under 3. Like, like it didn't matter, you know. He was such a good guy for Cleveland. Like, he loved the city, and the city loved him. So it's, yeah, losing Lindor sucks, and I know that, but like, losing Carlos Carrasco, that hurts more as a fan, because he was just such a guy you can easily root for. And it's gonna, you know, I hope he does well in New York. I hope the Mets don't screw him up too badly.
Yeah, but those are definitely some names that I had on my list that were.
And Bieber, of course. And I mean, now, gee,
right,
he won a, you know, I know it was a 60-game season, but like, dude, he struck out like 17 guys per 9 last year. Like, had a 1.6. Like, come on, like, the Indians pipeline that they have with pitchers it rivals Tampa.
It's very impressive. Yeah,
I mean, and they can take guys who are not heralded. Like, none of the guys who come up with the Indians who actually pitch really well are really hardly ever heralded prospects. Kluber wasn't heralded. Clevenger wasn't heralded. Bieber wasn't heralded. You know, but they figure it out, and they have a development system in place that gets the most out of everybody that they draft and or pick up and bring into the organization. So, like I said, you know, it sucks they don't pay in money for anybody, but they get the most out of their players for the most part.
Yeah, they developed the pitchers very, very well. Yeah, Nagy was the guy that I had. That 96 that you mentioned was a great year. Jose Mesa, a couple big years.
Yeah, we're not talking about him. We don't talk about Jose Mesa.
I know he didn't finish it off like he should have, but yeah, great seasons in 95 and 97.
He was phenomenal. Yeah, but you know, we always remember Craig Counsell.
Yeah. Carlos Baerga is the guy that I remember from those 90s teams, although he was kind of a little bit prior to this time frame, like 92, 93 were his best years.
Yeah, I mean, I can still remember like almost every infield by year. I mean, you had Tomei and Baerga and Vizquel, and then, you know, whether it was Travis Fryman or Matt Williams, or, you know, even, I mean, Tomei started as a third baseman too.
Yeah,
when he came up. So you know, those infields were always just bonkers. And then, like, I almost always forget that Manny Ramirez came up with the Indians too, which is, because you remember all of his great moments with Boston, and that makes, or LA, obviously for you, like, that makes sense because he had great moments with Boston and LA. But he put himself on the map with the Indians.
Yeah,
and he started Manny being Manny in Cleveland.
Yeah. You know? And yeah, the other name that you mentioned though, Vizquel, like, he's a guy that was just there forever, just as smooth as shortstop, and it's a guy that I was kind of surprised wasn't on here. Obviously, the offensive numbers weren't as impressive, but he was decent at the plate, and just, you could watch him field ground balls, all day.
Right. No, yeah, I mean, yeah, the the Hall of Fame thing is different because the off the field stuff that came out in the last couple of years,
Right.
that's not going to help him. But just straight up, just looking at stuff on the field, like he was, him playing defense. There's nobody better at that around that time. He was as smooth as ever come. The bare hand pickups and all that, like he could do anything out there.
Yeah,
He
I think
really
it
could,
went
like,
from basically went from like Ozzie Smith to
right,
Vizquel, and now it's Andrelton Simmons. Is like that's
right.
kind of like that lineage of that great
Mhm.
shortstop. They're worth the price of admission to watch them play defense.
I agree. Yeah, I totally agree. And that they're not going to hit much, but it doesn't matter because they're so much fun to watch defensively, and he was for so long. That's
Mhm.
like the Hall of Fame case, just on the field stuff. He's probably a compiler. He's played for so
Mhm.
long. Like
Right.
his numbers aren't there offensively. If you take just the on field stuff, if Ozzie Smith's Hall of Famer, Omar Vizquel probably is too. But there's arguments to be made for and against that, and I totally understand both.
Yeah, and then the guys who were on this roster, but it was tough to get like maybe their best year, like Manny. I'm not sure if I got his best year. He was arguably better in 2000, but he had fewer games, so he had better rate stats, but maybe better counting stats in '99. Jose Ramirez, Lindor, Kluber, they were all kind of great in those like 17, 18, 19 years. And I think Ramirez and Lindor both had great years. Their best years were in 18. So it's like, who do you pick? Because they both kind of dropped off a little bit in 19 and were not as good. So it was like you get one of their best years, and then a step below for the other one. So that was it was basically which one are you going with in 18?
Right.
So yeah, it was fun though doing this roster. This roster was one.
It's a lot of guys. You're like, the Indians, whatever. But like, you look back at some of their best players they've had for the last 25 years. Like, oh, geez, there's a lot of all-time dudes on here.
Yeah, I mean, I was definitely not an Indians fan. Because if you don't have ties to the Indians in the mid '90s, you're going to be a Ken Griffey Jr. fan.
Sure.
And so I love those Mariners teams.
And they kept Ken Griffey Jr. from winning a lot.
Yeah, especially that 95 team. Yeah. So I was not an Indians fan, but like I really was looking forward to putting this roster together because of like all those great players. So it was a lot of fun. This was a tough one though. Sometimes it's tough to like find guys in certain years and you're struggling and you're getting guys, but this one it was a lot of fun to put together. But again, those tough decisions. And if you guys want to criticize my decisions, go ahead, let me have it. Reach out on Twitter, on Instagram, whatever, and tell me what you would do differently on this roster. Anthony, got to put you in the hot seat right now to answer some questions from the listeners and also some that I've got. Again, we open it up for questions on Twitter and Instagram each week. So make sure to follow there to get your questions in. First comes from Kyle Jost, who asks, who is the best player from Major League?
Best like actual player.
Like who do you think is the best player on that Indians team?
I mean, because Serrano was, an all power guy, and not a lot of finesse there. I mean, Willie Mays Hayes, in theory, by the end of his first season, probably would have been the best because he gets on base, steals bases, has some pop, even though he's not a home run hitter yet, like he was in Major League 2. Taylor's a glue guy. Dorn is an aging veteran. Like I feel like Ed is, Harris is the same. Like you got to stay Hayes at that point, right?
I think so. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And then Chris Heilman wants to know. So we're sitting here in John Adams' seats. Like, what's the deal with John Adams? And I'm sure you know this. He pointed this out. Do you know that he has 2 season tickets provided by him from the Indians, and of course, one of those seats is used by him?
Yeah. Well, I mean, after all this time, he's been there since Jacobs Field opened. I mean, doing his thing. So there was even last year they wanted to bring him in as like the lone fan they were going to allow in the stadium, and he said no. He said he didn't want to have that kind of special treatment or anything like that. So he said no to it. But yeah, he's just a fixture now, and it's again you can take the appropriation bend if you want to. And again, they've been doing that for so long. I totally understand it. But it's always something that you always feel when the Indians are there and they're playing well and they got men in scoring position or whatever. Like you hear the drum in the back of your head, and it sucks now because the Indians don't draw. Even when they're good, they don't really draw, which is you can say what the reason is, and I don't, there's many reasons, probably many factors involved. But the Indians don't draw anymore because they did draw so well back when they were great in the 90s, and obviously, and they've been great for the last 10 years really, and they still don't really draw, which is, it's hard to really pinpoint why. There's probably a number of factors, but there's when the ballpark is full and you can hear Adams drum through like a rally going on right now, it's something. It's very, very cool to be there for it.
Yeah. Alex Morales always chimes in with a bunch of questions. He always peppers me with a bunch on Twitter. So first he throws out Cleveland baseball team. So I mean, what are they going to be called?
That's a great question. Teamy McTeam Face. I don't know. Like, I really have no idea. They're playing it close to the vest. If they want to go back, the Spiders obviously is the one thing. The Forest Cities. I know, like no one thinks of Cleveland as the what's called the Forest City, which is what their nickname of the city is. They were the Forest Cities for a while. If they want to really go back for it, they could do something along those lines. I mean, I don't know, man. Like,
if you had your pick, what would you go with?
I don't even. They should call it the Lindors now. They call it the Naps. Called the Cleveland Frankies. I really don't know, man. I wish I had an answer like pep like that I really just had in the holster that I really wanted there, but it's going to be so hard to rebrand themselves as something that's not just what like the Indians. I really have no idea. Like, and the Indians, the name didn't bother me as much as like Chief Wahoo did. Chief Wahoo was insanely racist. It seems a racist caricature of a Native American. Indians, I get. It's not like they were calling themselves the Redskins. Redskins is a really different moniker than Indians, but I understand why they want to get rid of it, or they didn't want to get rid of it, but are being told to get rid of it. Yeah, I like I said, I wish I had a better answer for you. I bet they'll try to go something like very generic, like the Wildcats or something. Like and everyone's gonna hate it, but then they'll forget about it, and that's probably what they're going for anyway.
Ricky Vaughn, legend or canceled? I mean, obviously in the time he was a stud in the movie, but I mean by now, like if you were pitching now, would he be like cancel culture or what?
Would he be like well? No, because like I mean, he's not like he's John Rocker. Like he's got a heart of gold. I mean, he learns his lesson in Major League Two. He tries to sell out and go corporate, and it doesn't work for him. And he goes and he realizes what really makes him who he is. I think it's almost the opposite of being canceled. Like he was already canceled. He was in the California Penal League.
It's true.
He was literally in jail for stealing a car. I think he's a success story at this point. Even if he pitches for 2 more years, I think he's a success story.
He had to have won Comeback Player of the Year that year, right?
You have to imagine, right? Yeah. Coming back from the Penal League. Yeah.
So this one may be a tough one to answer. Not necessarily hard, difficult, but just emotionally. What's the market for Jose Ramirez?
Probably pretty decent. I mean, you got to imagine, right? I mean, coming off finishing second in the MVP voting. 3 of his last 4 years, he's been a top 3 in the MVP. Like I said, we mentioned before in the podcast, the funny thing is that he has 3 top 3 finishes in MVP voting. Lindor's got 0, I think. So, Lindor's an amazing player, of course, but Jose Ramirez does not get the credit he deserves. And he's one of those guys who signed one of those hometown discount contracts, and a couple of them, in fact, actually, just to keep him around and buy out his arbitration years. Because he loved Cleveland, and like I said, Cleveland loves their players. They loved Lindor. They wanted to keep him, but Lindor got too good on a national stage to stay in Cleveland. Ramirez didn't yet, which is odd because Ramirez has been one of the better players in baseball the last 5 years.
Yeah.
So I would imagine. Is he a free agent this year or next year? It's got to be next year, right? Jose Ramirez. He's gonna be a free agent when 2022. So yeah, We got team options. Okay, so there's still opportunities for them to keep him around if they want to, because I think they'll be competitive this year,
Mm-hmm.
because their pitching's that good. They won't score any runs, but they didn't last year, and they so their offense has been the problem for the last few seasons, and the stinky secret last year was Lindor was really bad offensively. He didn't have a good year at all, and they were still in the playoffs. So their pitching will keep them in games. Ramirez will be good. They won't hit a lick, but so they want to keep him, they can. But if they want to dish him out for some prospects, they have the opportunity to now. But they also wait a year if they want to, because they have team options with that contract that's very team friendly.
Yeah.
So if they do trade him, they'll be able to leverage more for themselves if they want to. So the market should be pretty good for Jose Ramirez. And he's only, what is he only now? He's only 28 this year. Yeah. So
yeah. Eli Morgan, is he going to get a shot? Are you familiar with Eli Morgan?
Not totally.
He's a local boy from Southern California. Went to Peninsula High School in Palos Verdes. I think Alex Morales was the coach at Peninsula when Eli Morgan was there. Then he played at Gonzaga. But he's throwing him out there as maybe a prospect to look out for, that he would like to see succeed. But sticking with that, with young pitchers, I mean, is this the best pitching staff under 25? Another question from Morales. I mean, I don't know how old Bieber is now, but we've talked about,
he's gonna be 26 this year. Yeah.
The arms that they churn out. Tristan McKenzie was an electric arm, fun to watch when he was called up last year.
Yeah. And they're still going to be very good this year in that regard. Bieber's 26, Aaron Savali, he had a down year last year, but he was very good 2 years ago. He's 26. Zach Plezak's 26. They kept him and dealt with Clevenger after the whole COVID snafu with all that. So he's still 26. McKenzie's 23. James Karinchak's one of the best relievers in baseball you've never heard of, with the crazy curveball. He strikes out 15 guys per 9 innings. Last year struck out 18 guys per 9 innings. That's how crazy stuff he has. No, so their pitching staff is going to be good, and they always will be. They're still young enough. They have guys like Logan Allen still coming up too. Cal Quantrill are still fairly young. They're always going to find pitchers, basically, is what it comes down to. So I think they are poised to be solidly second place in the AL Central again if things break right for them. I will say, because I mean the Twins are good, White Sox are going to be good. The Indians are going to be in ball games for sure.
Another question he asked: Joey or Albert? So I mean, if I run into him in a in a dark street corner and I call him Joey,
you're not calling him Joey. Unless you want a beat down.
What would be worse? Calling Albert Bell Joey or calling Jim Everett Chris?
I think you get a very similar result. Is what it comes down to. But Joey or Albert Bell, he's one of those guys that I don't think you want to cross. Let's just say he literally used to run down kids in his car in Cleveland for throwing eggs at his house, which, by the way, they're throwing eggs at his house in Cleveland in the mid 90s, and he would get in his car and chase down the kids in his car on Halloween night. That's the kind of person Albert Bell was. So
was it Fernando Vina or Jose Vidro? Who was that?
Fernando Vina. He broke his leg. Yeah, because he he form tackled him when he was trying to make a double play. Yeah, when the Brewers were still in the AL.
Yeah, that was he must have called him Joey.
Yeah. He the train was coming down those tracks and he didn't get out of the way.
Tomei or Manny?
It's hard not to say Tomei. I mean, Manny is great, but a lot of his great moments didn't come with the Indians. I know Tomei played for a lot of teams too, but Tomei really is a Clevelander at heart. I think he realizes that. I think the city was so pissed when he left in free agency. He left because he'd signed at that point a mega deal with Philly, like 6 for $105, which is insane money then. I mean, they were ready to put a statue for Tomei outside of Coors Field, outside of Jake then. And the irony now is that there's a statue outside of the Jake now of Jim Tomei, but then he left, and they were jilted when he left.
Mm-hmm.
But I think they, when he came back, I think he put people at ease, and I think they realized that he was one of the most lovable people that have ever come through the Indians franchise. Just from all accounts, one of the nicest people ever to play the game. And also he had 600 homers. So, it's hard to hate a guy like that. So Tomei every day, I think, in that comparison.
Where is Travis Hafner?
It's a great question. I'm sure Google search could find that out, but he was so fun in those teams that weren't very good except for the 07 team. Like, he was a guy who didn't play much baseball growing up. He was one of those guys who you could trick into saying go get a box of curveballs out of the dugout because he didn't know, because he was just a rube from North Dakota, a big farm kid. Didn't play much baseball until he got to college, but then they realized that he could hit, and he could hit really well. I miss Pronk a lot. Pronk was one of, like, the heartbeat of those teams, like with him and Sizemore, and like even like Ronnie Belliard on those teams. It was just a fun, weird, misshapen like island of misfit toys kind of team that shouldn't have worked but did. He was such a fun guy to root for. He was like a mini Tomei in that regard, but Tomei was more polished. But Pronk, I think he still has the record tied for most grand slams in a season with Mattingly. I think he had 6 grand slams one year. 5 or 6. He was just one of those dudes you could just always root for.
Mm-hmm. And then the Lou Boudreau award winners. Do you know any of those guys? Yes, who are the Lou Boudreau award winners?
Oh boy, no. Off the top of my head, I could not tell you.
He was looking him up. He was like the first guy to shift.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. He was a legendary figure in Cleveland. For all he did, both playing, managing, there's a reason why his number's up on the rafters.
Yeah, and so we went over the name change. The other thing that just popped in my head talking about Albert Bell. I mean, my favorite Albert Bell story is that cork bat incident.
Oh yeah, with Jason Grimsley going through the vents to go get his bat.
It's just, I mean, you'd think that would be in the movie Major League because it's just something so crazy and out there.
It's ridiculous. Yeah.
Not that it happened in real life.
Yeah. It's insane, and it actually happened. And like they wouldn't know that it wasn't his bats when it was Paul Sorrento getting his bats dropped in there. It's like, it's a great try. I mean,
we didn't have any Albert Bell bats that were not corked.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, go some of his uncorked bats. There aren't any. Oh, okay. Yeah. Cool. It's like, well, gonna have to wear this one, I think.
Then I'll wrap it up with this one that I had. Who is a worse owner? So the Dolan family or Rachel Phelps?
I mean, I like this, we talked about the Dolans earlier, and they've done, in their eyes, they've done a bang up job. I think overall there's room for improvement, but it's hard when they're not spending money to win consistently as they have. So even the Rays, who are doing it now, the Indians win more than the Rays, or have wins more than the Rays consistently over the last decade. So Rachel Phelps, I mean, she tried to torpedo the team, but didn't work because she got the team chemistry right. So she's if you put her with Billy Beane, I feel like they could figure out a way to actually win in the playoffs at some point because, she figured out the chemistry, he figures out the roster, and somehow it all works.
Yeah, it's interesting. Was she the first owner to want to move her team to Florida? Because after her, everyone always threatens with that, right?
Yeah.
The Giants almost moved there. The Mariners almost moved there. It seems like everyone's almost moving there, but I feel like she was the first one.
Yeah. And it's like Preston. It's like the Back to the Future when they had the, Cubs win World Series thing in the background, so I don't know, man. She clearly had a vision and tried to see it through. So
did you know in the original script, she actually she wanted them to win, and it was all a ploy to get them to team up and like unite against her and win.
So it was like a halfway Ted Lasso kind of thing. Yeah. Have
Yeah,
you seen
but
Ted
then
Lasso? Yeah.
no, I have not. But then they
It's worth
they're
your
like
time. Yeah.
they're like, oh, it sucks. Then they changed the ending to keep it as her as being like the villain.
And then she came back in Major League 2. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah,
So
but she comes back Major League 2, and she's still trying to, like guys, at some point you're not going to move the team. Like the team's winning. Like it's like in the middle of the season, like your plan is already ruined. So well, just embrace it at that point.
Yeah, it's still. I mean,
yeah,
I would want to get out of Cleveland too. I'm sure Ichiro would.
Yeah, well, yeah. He did not endear himself to Cleveland either.
All right, yes. So those are the questions. Again, make sure to follow on Twitter and Instagram to get those in each week. Anthony, let's get out those red pens and grade this roster. And again, we're giving it a grade based on all of the other rosters that I've created. So how would you grade this roster? What are some strengths, weaknesses, and what letter grade would you assign it?
Dude, I mean, how could you not give this lineup an A? I mean, you're getting some all-time players. You got a Hall of Famer in Tomei and Alomar. Kenny Lofton, who should have been a Hall of Famer. Manny Ramirez doing a bunch of steroids.
Right.
Putting together one of the best seasons like ever. A great DH in Travis Hafner. You got defense on the left side of the infield, Ramirez and Lindor. You got defense at second, Roberto Alomar. Victor Martinez was not known for his behind the plate skill, but he was a great offensive guy, a Carlos Santana type of player. I don't know how you don't give that offense an A. And then you also have 3 Cy Youngs in the rotation. And Bartolo throwing cheese, and Justin Masterson throwing sinkers, sinkers and sliders. I think the bullpen is a little suspect. I will say Cody Allen was great for a long time. Andrew Miller for that 2016 season was the best reliever in baseball. I think getting to the ninth, I think, or getting to the 8th, I guess, would be a little difficult. That bridge there is probably the toughest spot you're going to get. So I think the bullpen gets like a B. You get an A- for the rotation because you got 3 Cy Young winners in there. I'm sorry, man. Like 3 Cy Young winners and family. So I gotta give it an A. I'm sorry.
So overall grade for the entire team, what do you think?
It's got to be in the A- range. I know the bullpen's a little suspect, but like I'm still giving it an A-.
Okay, I think that's fair. Yeah, I think when you just look at the names and the stats, I mean, there's a lot of bold ink there on these BBREF pages as league leaders. When I compare them to the other teams that I've created, they're pretty much above average across the board offensively. Lots of doubles, lots of walks. They've got good on base skills.
Yep.
And to go along with those guys get on base, a lot of runs as well. They're below average defensively. Lofton.
That is true. Yeah. That is true.
Lofton, there are good, at the important positions like Lofton and Lindor. The corner outfielders are not good.
Basically, up the middle, they're set.
And that's where you want. That's where it's most important. So that does help. But some other teams are strong at all like 8 spots defensively. So it's just a tick against them, not necessarily a huge downside, but just something there. The pitchers are actually even with the 3 Cy Youngs, and again, it's tough to really compare because the era like in the 90s is like so different than even now. So when you compare numbers from then to now, it's not necessarily the same. Now the ball is juiced. Back then the players were juiced, so who knows?
Right.
But they're actually, the pitchers are, when you take in the starters and the relievers, they're kind of average-ish across the board. They are really good though in strikeouts per 9, walks per 9, and of course if they're getting those, Ks to walk as well, so that helps. So I'm kind of right there along with you, though, maybe just a tick below. I'm giving them a B plus overall. Um, but that offense is going to be fun to watch if you could theoretically get that one out there. So I think we're pretty much in line, A minus, B plus in our 2 grades there. But yeah, so I think this is a really good team that would win a bunch of games in competing against similar constructed rosters. Anthony, it's been a lot of fun talking about the Indians, but it's time to wrap up. So what are your final thoughts about the Indians, about the organization? Anything you want to say?
Well, like I said, it's been a long time since this team won it, obviously, 1948. I was there Game 7 in 2016. It was one of the worst nights of my life. They made the comeback and Rajai hit the home run, and they had the chance in the 9th, and then the BS rain delay, and then they lost it. And then the second the game ended, there was a deluge, a downpour in Cleveland, and we were doing our post-game show for that with literally next to our social media guy for Fox Sports. We have a bunch of electric equipment there, printers and lights and everything. We were doing it. There was like 2 inches of water underneath us at that point because it was that much rain coming in, and it was pooling off of the tarps that we had and going down onto all our computers and everything, and it was an absolute nightmare, and I wanted to die. Which kind of brings me back to why people are Indians fans in the first place, because most of them have died without seeing an actual title, and it's probably going to be a minute before they see another one. So I wish that they could put together this same front office with a front office like the Padres, where like you have the smart people making the roster decisions, but then you have a team that's going for it by spending money. And that's something they never do. So I'm not expecting it. I just wish it would happen, because I think with if they pull the right strings with the player development, and they have, and then if they would try to spend some money and get some great players in, like they need offensive help, and they didn't do anything to try to fix that. They got Eddie Rosario. Cool. That's great. He's fine. He's better than who are they going to put there anyway, but try to actually get players that can make a difference offensively, do it in free agency, spend a little money. It'll come back to you. You have to imagine, but they don't do that. So I wish at some point that would happen, but I don't expect it to.
Yeah, they had that incredible run in the 90s where they were just unreal to watch. And then more recently, their stretch here, in 16, 17, 18, where they've been very good. They've come so close to getting over the hump in those stretches, but it's tough to get over that hump. I think the more recent stretch of success is more impressive than that one in the 90s because of the financial restraints of ownership. Right. Like we've mentioned throughout the podcast, the front office is, I think one of the best in baseball. And if ownership was actually invested in winning, as opposed to maybe, turning a profit, they could be a real perennial power with the way that they're able to produce talent. But it's a shame that they're not, because I think, I've mentioned, it's been discussed in previous episodes where, there's only 30 Major League Baseball franchises. And so being an owner of one of those, in my opinion, I'm no billionaire. I'm not going to tell these people what to do with their money. But, I think that owning one is a civic duty. It's not a business venture where
it shouldn't be.
Exactly.
It shouldn't be, but it is for a lot of players, or a lot of owners. So
unfortunately, but because it's such a finite number, there's only 30 of them, and it's technically it's your team, but I mean, I think the team belongs to the city, and it's your duty as an owner to do it for the city and compete. And if this ownership, if the Dolans or whoever owned the team, whether it's the Indians or whatever team we're talking about, I think they should invest. And if this ownership group were invested, then they could really be something. But it's a shame that they're not.
Yep.
and they're letting that fan base down. So
yeah, which, you know, that's really a big reason why the fans aren't coming out anymore, because they, you know, they, a lot of the casual fan doesn't know how great the Indians are in player development.
right.
You know, like the casual fan knows that, hey, they trade all their good players. Hey, they traded Cliff Lee. Hey, they traded CC Sabathia. Hey, they traded Francisco Lindor. You know, they know that they trade all these players. They don't know who they get back. And then when the, you know, 4 years later, when that guy becomes good at the big leagues, they don't care. They don't care that it was because, you know, that they traded Ryan Ludwig at the deadline on a bad team to San Diego in 2010 and got a guy that no one ever heard of named Corey Kluber. Like, they don't care when Corey Kluber comes up and wins a couple Cy Youngs. They don't care how they got him. They just care that he's there.
Yeah.
So they've put themselves in a spot where they literally cannot master the PR. It's impossible to do so with the way they run their franchise to win the PR battle. So you just have to hope that they win and eventually people will come back. But like, you know, this is not a good offseason for them, obviously. But again, next year, if they have the same win percentage as this year, I wouldn't be shocked.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, you lose Lindor and he's great, obviously. And, you know, Carrasco is great too. But like, there are guys you can replace their numbers, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. But you can't replace the feeling and the hole they make in your roster.
Right. All right. Well, Anthony, it was a lot of fun doing this. Glad we got to do this tonight. So again, thank you for coming on and talking about the Cleveland Indians. And, you know, should I name this podcast the Indians podcast or just the Cleveland baseball team podcast?
The Cleveland baseball team podcast for now, just a placeholder.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, again, so thanks for joining us again. And, you know, always enjoy having you on the program.
Yeah, man. Always fun to be here.
All right. This is Billy Ballas of Box Seat Banter signing off.